Week 3 is almost upon us, which means we're back at it with another must-start and sit video for the NFL football season. I'm Dave Loughran of Awesemo.com, and today we're breaking it all down, but I want you to be clear on something, right? I'm never going to tell you to start Derrick Henry. If you're not starting Derrick Henry week to week, you probably shouldn't be playing fantasy football. The same goes for Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook and Javonte Adams and all of those great stud workhorse players that you drafted in the first or second round. But my objective here today isn't only to give you the top options to start and the worst ones that you want to sit, but to help you identify which ones are good starters and aren't good starters each week. But more than anything, we're talking guys that you probably drafted, after the third round, or guys that maybe you drafted in the third round or earlier, right? That you actually have some concerns about. And maybe they started off awfully this season. They got off to a terrible start, but now we're in position to smash. So whether it's keep playing this guy, whether it's, oh my God, I can't believe he's been this good, we're going to start him again, or it's, hey, pump the brakes, don't freak out, get him in your starting lineups this week. That's what we're here for. Let's get into it. Must starts, must sits for week 3. And before we do, if you don't mind, hit that thumbs up. Only takes a second, helps us greatly here, improve the channel, keep things going, and, well, build upon what we've already done thanks to you supporting us all this time. Subscribe, hit that thumbs up, and hit me with a follow at Laffy_D on Twitter. That's LOUGHY_D. Let's get into it. I don't want to say this is a make or break spot for Saquon Barkley because there's still a ton of time left in the season, but we absolutely want to see something sooner than later from a guy who we drafted in the late first or early second rounds. Barkley played on only 3 days rest in week 2's Thursday Night Football loss to Washington, but touched the ball 15 times and actually saw a significant uptick in snaps, logging 84% of them after being on the field for only 48% of them in week 1. Now he'll have 9 days in between games to be fully rested for a mouth-watering matchup against the Falcons, who have been a nightmare on defense and are 3-point dogs on the road. Barkley showed a glimpse of his pre-injury self on Thursday too, with a 41-yard run, and we have to believe he still has the explosion and elusiveness to make him a top-tier running back again. While the early season numbers don't look great, there's no way we aren't plugging Barkley into lineups this Sunday. The Giants' offensive line is still a problem, for sure, but volume will be the key to success for Barkley. And once he's fully healthy, there will be no reason to keep rolling Devonte Booker onto the field, who played only 14% of snaps in week 2. Javonte Williams will very likely be the Broncos' clear lead back by the end of his rookie season, but he isn't there yet. That said, Williams has only seen 1 fewer touch than Melvin Gordon on the season and has outtouched him 27-24 on the ground, so we're making progress. The Broncos have also been in favorable game scripts through the first 2 weeks, but week 3's home matchup against the Jets might be their best one yet. So far, the Jets have a bottom 6 run defense grade on PFF and are 26 in run DVOA on Football Outsiders. And Zach Wilson has been so bad under center in New York that the Denver offense should dominate both time of possession and have favorable field position throughout. While Williams hasn't been wildly impressive to kick off his NFL career, you likely drafted him in the 7th or 8th round, which at worst would have made him a flex play in 12-team leagues. I hadn't been on tent in starting Williams yet at all this season, but this is the week to plug him in as a flex play and let the Jets do their thing for him. Both Williams and Gordon have 4 carries in the red zone this season, but the former is the only one with a carry inside the 10. There's a lot to like in week 3 for the young rookie running back. Mike Williams has been spectacular through the first 2 weeks, leading the Chargers in receptions, targets, and touchdowns. Actually, Williams' 2 touchdown receptions are the only ones Justin Herbert has thrown this year. Williams has a 25% target share too, which is extremely encouraging given the Chargers offense has yet to exhibit that same explosiveness we saw with Herbert under center in 2020. That outburst could happen on Sunday though when they take on the Chiefs, who score points in bunches and almost always force their opponents to throw. Interestingly, Herbert's pass volume is limited in 2 meetings with the Kansas City Chiefs last year, but a lot of that has to do with his efficiency, averaging nearly 10 yards per attempt and eclipsing 300 yards in both of those games. Still, this game boasts a slate-high 55.5-point total, and the Chargers are 6.5-point road dogs. Given Williams' huge early involvement in the offense, and more importantly, his team-leading 3 targets inside the 10-yard line, you'd be crazy not to start him everywhere you have him in Sunday's divisional showdown. Tyson Williams and Marquise Brown both make for great starts this week against the putrid Lions defense. I'd say this first though, don't get ahead of yourself with either of these guys. You aren't starting them over your studs. But if you have either of them on your roster and need to fill the flex or the wide receiver 3 spot, you are in great shape. We already know there's a timeshare in Baltimore, but Williams has been the most efficient back between him and Latavius Murray, and I'm not buying into Devonta Freeman carving out a big role quite yet. Williams is also the only running back in Baltimore to see a single target in the passing game between the three, hauling in 5 of his 6 looks through the first 2 weeks. He's run 29 routes in 2 weeks compared to none for Murray or Freeman. The Lions have also allowed 76 points across their first 2 games and have been carved up on the ground and through the air, which is exactly why Marquise Brown needs to be in our lineups this week too. He has actually looked like a wide receiver 1, which is surprising, and is the top option in Baltimore right now, right ahead of Sammy Watkins. But what makes Brown special, assuming he continues to draw these high target totals, is his ability to break off huge plays. He has 30% of the Ravens' air yards so far, leads them in targets, yards, and touchdowns, and has hauled in 75% of the passes thrown his way. Detroit's pass defense grades out dead last on both PFF and Football Outsiders, allowing 10.8 yards per attempt and a ridiculous 148 passer rating. What's crazy, though, is their offense has actually been serviceable, which has created some amazing game environments. There's no doubt both Williams and Brown can excel in what is arguably the best all-around matchup in the NFL right now. Matthew Stafford's connection with Cooper Kupp has been undeniable to start the season, as Kupp leads all receivers in fantasy points through the first 2 weeks and has been utilized all over the field, including deep routes. His play has made it easy for people to forget about, or better yet, worry about Robert Woods and Tyler Higbee. But there's no way I'm sitting these guys in week 3 against the Bucs, where the game has a 55.5 point total. The Rams are only 1-point dogs at home and will undoubtedly struggle to move the ball on the ground against Tampa's stifling run defense. The Buccaneers secondary hasn't exactly looked elite though. They're going to create turnovers for sure and will force quarterbacks to make bad mistakes with pressure from their defensive line. But they've already coughed up big yardage to Matt Ryan and Dak Prescott with 5 passing touchdowns seeded thus far. So while Woods' role has been smaller than Kupp's, he's still running routes on 83% of dropbacks and went from playing 77% of snaps in week 1 to 98% of snaps in week 2. He's still the second most targeted player on the Rams and has already drawn 3 looks inside the 10-yard line. Seriously, don't give up on Woods just because he's had a couple disappointing games. He and Higbee, who has literally played 100% of snaps in back-to-back weeks but was underutilized in week 2, have huge upside on Sunday and should not be benched. Stafford is so much better than Jared Goff, and it's only a matter of time before these guys get involved. I'm thinking it'll happen this weekend. Before we get to our number 1 must-start player of week 3, and he might surprise you, so stick around, I got to tell you about the most ridiculous promo we have going on and will probably ever run. Partnering with Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports to give you guys 2 free months, completely free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum. That includes all of the tools that we have to offer on the site, not just for football, but for every single sport. And all of these tools, of course, created by the number 1 DFS player out there, Alex Baker, Awesemo himself, who's won legitimately millions of dollars using these very tools. So go over, sign up at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports using the link in the description, deposit $10 or more, and get $180 worth of Awesemo Plus Platinum. We'll never run anything like this again. At least I hope we don't. So take advantage of it now and we'll catch you over there. I wanted to include Brandin Cooks in this list of starters because I'm sure many of you have questions about whether or not you can roster him this week. Here's what I'll say. If you have a viable replacement who should see enough volume and has a semi-competent quarterback, go ahead and take Cooks out of your lineups. But first, consider this. Davis Mills, coming in to replace Tyrod Taylor in the second half of last week's game, targeted Cooks on 56% of his pass attempts. Yes, Mills targeted Cooks on 10 of 18 attempts, and that was all in one single half. And while he failed to convert most of them in the receptions, they still hooked up for a 2-yard touchdown and a 29-yard gain. But this type of volume is insanely hard to come by, and there's really no reason to assume that will change Thursday when Houston hosts the Panthers. We're sacrificing efficiency for volume, sure, but in Cook's case, it's totally fine. He has elite big play potential, is going to see another massive target share, and is the only legitimate receiver on this Texans roster. So while we all hate seeing Mills replace Taylor, who is actually playing pretty damn well, we can be pretty certain that the 3rd-round rookie signal caller will be leaning heavily on his best player. And now for our must-sit players for week 3, starting with Darrell Henderson and Sonny Michel. While I love the Rams passing game this week in what feels like perfect conditions for a shootout, I'm going to be fading their run game. Whether it's Darrell Henderson or Sonny Michel who gets the start, this is a pretty brutal matchup. I don't think it's unrealistic to think these guys could see some involvement in the passing game, but it probably won't be enough to make them good starts if they can't get anything going on the ground. The Bucs have allowed 115 total rushing yards through the first 2 weeks, and that should come as no surprise to anyone. They returned all of the same players from 2020, where they held opponents to a paltry 80 rushing yards per game with 3.6 yards per carry and surrendered only 10 touchdowns on the ground all year. This doesn't even take into account the fact that Henderson could be less than 100% if he is active. And if Henderson sits, Michel becomes an even worse option, who has never been featured as a pass-catching back and probably won't be on Sunday either. Devin Singletary is averaging nearly 5 yards per carry for his career and showed some great flashes on Sunday like he's done many times in the past. But the problem with the third-year back is he's never going to score unless it's a long run. Josh Allen is already going to take plenty of goal line attempts away from the running backs, but now that Zach Moss is back in the rotation, things get even uglier for Singletary. Moss scored 2 touchdowns in week 2 from 7 and 1 yard out, and carried 3 times inside the 10-yard line to Singletary's 1. He's the clear goal line back in Buffalo alongside Allen, while Singletary is on the outside looking in. The Bills are already going to run the ball at one of the league's lower clips, which basically leaves Singletary in a position where he'll need to constantly break off big plays in order to be worthy of weekly starts. And while the Washington defense hasn't exactly looked like they're deserving of all the superlatives heaped upon them after an impressive 2020 campaign, this isn't exactly an easy matchup for Buffalo's run game either. Michael Pittman Jr. was my favorite sleeper pick in fantasy drafts coming into 2021, and it looked like all of that faith in the second-year receiver was about to pay off last week when he erupted for 123 yards on 8 receptions and 12 targets against the very tough Rams defense. But then Carson Wentz somehow managed to sprain both of his ankles. Seriously, how does that even happen? You'd think he'd need to leap off of a tall structure in order to sustain that type of damage, but here we are. In all seriousness, though, it doesn't matter what you think about Wentz and his performance through the first 2 weeks. He was still a massive upgrade from Jacob Eason, who will likely be thrust into action against the Titans. Sure, Eason shouldn't have been expected to excel against the Rams, coming in cold off the bench to attempt a heroic late-game comeback, but my expectations remain very low for a guy who's played 5 career snaps at the NFL level. As much as I'll love Pittman when Wentz returns, and hopefully soon, he's a clear sit for me on Sunday. Oh, and it's also possible Paris Campbell returns to action in week 3 too. Thanks as always for watching. Head over to Awesemo.com. Check out everything we've got over there for season-long DFS, sports betting, you name it. And use that Yahoo promo. Sign up. Use the link in the description. Only $10 deposited or more and get 2 free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Everything on the site. I'm Dave Loughran. Thanks for watching. As always, we'll catch you back here for the next one. Peace.